Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel where I'm going to be going over another custom chess position. So this position is called Swimming in Tactics, and the reason why it's called this is because, well, firstly, it's very tactical. So white has all these pawns on light squares, and black has all these pawns on dark squares. So pawns on one color can be very good at defending one color of squares, but the other color of squares becomes very weak. So in this position, white's dark squares would be very weak, and black's light squares would be very weak. Adding on to this, we have uh, we have the kings in the center of the board, and while queenside castling is allowed, um, that might not make the position much safer. Also, white has these two. They have these two light squared bishops to attack black's light squares, and black has two dark squared bishops here. So that's going to increase the difficulty of the position. So the reason why it's called swimming in tactics, that's one, because it's extremely tactical, and when I go over some theory, I'll explain the main themes of this position. But the swimming part is because this position looks like a fish. So if you see like the curve of the pawns here this way, and then here would be like the tail of the fish. So that's where the name of the position comes from. So when we start the theory, some key elements is that this bishop over here on h1, and because this position is symmetrical, same applies for black, these bishops are kind of blocked in by the g2 pawn. So one of the key parts of the opening is where we're going to be moving these knights so that we can move the pawns, and then we could have the bishops staring out to attack. Another thing is where to put the rooks, and if you notice that these bishops they indirectly stare at the rooks, so there could be some tactics that way. The other idea is that, of course, once the sides want to maybe gain some space in the center. Actually, this e4 is not commonly seen just because it doesn't help to defend the dark squares, and it also would block this bishop. So let's begin. So there are many main moves, and I can't go over all the theory because there's just so much, but just going to cover some basic topics in this custom position. So let's go over 194. So 194 aims to play g4 and open up the position. It also brings the knight to the most central square on the board. One downside is that it blocks this bishop's attack over the rook on a8 temporarily. However, there could be some tactics with after this pawn moves. If white had two moves in a row, for example, they could move the pawn and then take on d6 with check. Once black takes back, they win the rook. So after 94, we have 95. So as you can see, I have the engine running right now at the top right. So that's not the only move, but if I were to show every single move, it would just take too long. So 95, black kind of mirrors white and does the exact same thing. Now over here, white can play a couple things, a couple main moves I have. So g4 is one of them. And g4, of course, helps get that bishop out. And after here, black decides that they're going to move the rook. That's one of the things they can do. So rook d8 maybe aims to play d5, open up the position a little bit, and maybe protect the light squares. After rook d8 though, white wants to grab more space on this king side. Black could play g5 as well. And so if they do that, g5, then rook d1, white saves their rook, black saves their rook, white goes e3, and white is gonna play for d4 and just keep their slight advantage, as there's still one move ahead of black in this position. Black can respond with e6, and then as there's several moves over here. Bishop g3, and if black were to bishop g6 here is the move. So both sides are just getting their pieces out. Um, Bishop fg2, and now it's saying bishop e7. Um, because if the bishop were to go to g7, then white probably takes on d6 and then takes here. So there's lots of tactics. And so white has a small advantage. But over here, black could play rook d8 right away to get out of this bishop's indirect attack. Um, and then white takes advantage with g5. And after g5 is played, black can go g6. So and then after rook d1, for rook d1, I'm just looking over here, and the engine seems to like bishop e6, which might block this bishop, but the bishop's going to go to g7 anyways. After e3, knight f7 is an interesting move. Black is just trying to attack this g5 pawn. White can defend it with knight f3, then bishop f5, and black threatens to destruct white's pawn structure. H4 helps to protect that pawn. Now the bishop takes e4, the pawn takes back, black takes, and if white were to take back, then black will take on h2, and after white recaptures, black will win an extra pawn. So white instead just improves their position. Now white in this position, they have the bishop kind of aiming over here on the light squares, and then let's say they were to move the pawn, take over here, then they have a second bishop coming to c6, and that would be winning the game. So that's kind of what white is just trying to control those squares. Meanwhile, black will take a second pawn, and white can go to e6, which kind of just blocks black's e pawn from moving, and just also black can play g5 now to protect this pawn. And yeah, another theme of this position over here is that because each side has two bishops of one color, those two bishops, they can help enforce and protect each other, but they can only attack on one square. So if white trades off this bishop over here, they still have a bishop that can control the light squares over here. So furthermore, after taking, white just wins that pawn back, queen h5, knight f3, for example, and h3, black wants to save that pawn. And now comes the move that I thought the engine would recommend earlier, but I think that white should play e5 just to get this bishop freed. Black can take back, and then there comes a trade of rooks, for example. And of course, this is not the only move that these are not the only moves that can be played, but just showing an example of how the position can be played according to the engine. And white wins that pawn back, take, but they're still down by one pawn. Black can come into e4, and the game could continue. So this is like an example of a game that is very both sides show their ideas, and it ends in an even position here. So after white plays g4, going back to this knight e4, knight e5 variation, black could castle to get the rook out of a8, but I've noticed that, at least in the opening a lot, castling is not that great, because normally in a standard chess game, when one side wants to castle, they're doing that to get their king safer, but I wouldn't argue the king is any safer on c8 than it is on e8, and in some positions like this, it could be slightly weaker just because white could white could go in to c6, b7, a8 after they line the queen up. And also then if black's king is slightly weaker after casting queenside, black also took one tempo to do that. Um, so I would not recommend this. Okay, after 94-95, white can also play e3. So what the move e3 aims to do is to play d4 and expand in the center. Black will take this moment to play g5. Um, Rook d1, white moves the rook out of the way. Bishop g6, g4, rook d8. And the reason black played bishop g6 is because now if white were to play d4, black will just win the knight. So white can play bishop g3, which stops d5 from black, and black can play e6. So now we're having a symmetrical game here. Um, White develops the other bishop, and once again, um, well, actually, bishop here. Let's see what happens. Oh, then white just gets d4 in. So after bishop e7, though, um, after bishop e7, white can still play d4. C takes, e takes d4, and now knight d3 check. And yeah, I haven't looked at this specific variation, which is why I'm a little surprised. But again, this position's got so many tactics because there are so many tactics here. After rook takes d3, there's d5 coming on the board, and white's knight on e4 is pinned. So white can play here. Bishop takes d6. Rook e3 check. Now white saves the rook and the material is even. And white protects this pawn because the bishop was looking at the pawn. And again, the game could continue. So that's the first move. Now going all the way back, because there are many moves, but instead of theory, the more important part is to learn the ideas. And you can see that in this type of position, the reason why I only have 94, 95 is because even after, for example, rook d8, g4, g5, black is going to put the knight on e5 anyway. So in these positions, that's kind of the best move for black to play, but there are others. So that's 194. Now the next move I'm going to go over is rook d1. And what rook d1 aims to do is to right away go for this e3 d4 idea instead of moving the knight. But the knight will soon move as well. And because white has the first move, white has a little bit more flexibility. So the knight can go to other squares than just e4. But after rook d1, knight e5, black is doing this kind of standard plan. E3, g5. So black's playing the moves that we saw in the other variation, but and white can play knight e4 over here, and which would kind of transpose into lines I've shown. But in this line, white wants to play d4 as quick as possible, which is why they started the game with rook d1. So after d4, if black were to just take, then they're kind of allowing white to get what they want, and um, white just has a better space in the center, and because of this, white enjoys a little bit of an advantage. But as you can see from the engine, queen c2 is the move over here. Now, After queen c2, it looks like black is kind of hanging this knight, but it's not so simple. So if white were to take on d5, um, the bishop takes on on e5, and you might say, well, well, white just gave up. Sorry, black just gave up a knight for a pawn, and um, and white can always block this bishop c3 check, which would be very annoying. For example, knight f3 can be played over here. But black wants to keep a bishop on e5, and the idea is because remember this g2 pawn which blocks this h1 bishop. Um, White wanted to move that out of the way eventually to get their pieces out, but with the bishop on e5, they're unable to move the knight because the queen is behind the knight. So so white would have to move the queen back and then somehow move this knight, and then it would just take too long, and black's pieces are not like black's pieces are coming into the position and white's king is weak. So that's why after queen c2, the main move is bishop e2. White is just developing pieces here. Knight can go back to c6. Now uh, here's a point in the game where black can castle queenside actually, which I don't have that move right now. But the reason why black can also do that is because white is kind of preoccupied with defending their king, since black is coming into the position, and this rook also now is aiming down here as well. So it's a little bit less dangerous for black right now if they continue to play with initiative. The main move here is knight c6 though, and after knight c6, black is threatening to take on d4, and they're not actually threatening to win this pawn yet, but they can also go to b4 and then to c2 eventually, perhaps. So now in this position, white cannot go to e4 or f5 because the queen blocks the square. So white plays knight h5. Now they're looking for the g4 idea, like I've mentioned before. And after rook c8, black is defending the knight on c6. g4 is played, knight a5 is played, and black is basically just looking to win all these pawns. And while black looks to win the pawns on the queen side, white plays h4 looking to open up the king side. C takes d4, e takes d4, queen takes a2. All these pawns are falling, but white takes, black takes back, and bishop goes to e4. Black takes another pawn on b3, and white develops the knight to f3. Knight goes to f6, bishop to f5, e6. Now white takes because white didn't want black to take with the pawn on f6 because white wants to take this pawn on g5. So knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, bishop goes back to e4, and we continue the game from here. So in this resulting position from the theory over here, white is actually down 2 pawns, but white has more space in the center of the board, and they have potentially more lines for their pieces. Also, black's king is a little bit weaker in the position as well. Black will probably win back this g5 pawn eventually as well, which is why white has a slight advantage, because it's really important to note that like these pawns are more more advanced in these pawns. So black can play d5 over here to try and advance their own pawns. And you'll notice the engine does not recommend taking, because after taking, black can take back with the e6 pawn, and now both sides have even kind of even pawns in the center of the board, which would favor black. So instead, white goes to d3 over here, and and white still has a little bit more pawn presence in the center of the board. So that's kind of the rook d1 line, but white has some other lines so as well. So we covered knight e4, rook d1. Now the next move is knight h5. So white can start the game with knight h5, and it's similar to knight e4, but white is putting a knight on the edge of the board, which typically is not as good. But one of the main point of this move is that now once white plays g4, the bishop is directly staring at the rook. So knight e5, g4, and the rook has to move. Now in this position, normally you've seen in the other lines that the rook is going to go to d8 most often, but over here, because there's no knight blocking white's bishop on h1, bishop c6 check is a big threat in lots of lines, which is why rook c8 is the main move in this position. Now this c8 is the best square for the rook, so white tries to play bishop b7 to make the rook move, and now the rook can move, so let's say it moves to d8 over here. And white can play bishop after g2, which they're threatening to go to c6 now. So after bishop b7, the rook can also go to c7. And perhaps this is a little bit more accurate, but bishop e4, so white had to move the bishop again. Black plays g6 over here. Black's not actually threatening to take this knight because the bishop would take the queen. Rook c1 is played to just get out of black's bishop attack. And from here on, the game can go kind of normal developing moves. So let's go back to rook d8 after bishop b7. Well, white can still play bishop e4, but here g6, white plays e3. So actually, in this position where the rook's on d8, white play bishop e4 after g6. The best move actually over here is for white to ignore the rook that's kind of hanging. So they play e4, and then knight takes g4. So now the knight is attacking the queen. So white has to, well, I guess before white takes back, white's going to play bishop c6 check, and now we see why the rook didn't want to be on d7 initially, because the king doesn't have any moves, so the rook has to block. White takes the knight first. This rook is pinned, so it won't be going anywhere anyways. Black takes the rook on a1. Then white takes on d7. Black recaptures. Queen g2, d5. So if black were to take on h5, then white has a perpetual check. And that game ends in a draw. So black instead plays d5 to block the queen. And then we have an even game after knight f4. That's a move that can be played. Bishop fg2, maybe it might be a little bit more natural in this position. After g6 is played, knight f4 is played. And e6 over here is set as the best move. That gives some breathing room for the king and stops the knight coming from to d5. But if we were to check out knight takes g4 like in the other line, so this is a mistake, but the reason it's a mistake is because after rook d7, so this is like similar lines, but I think I was gonna say bishop c8 to kind of win the rook for free, but after takes and queen g2, white is coming in to kind of checkmate black, and after d5, white can just take. So white is winning in this position. But yeah, that's just a couple. That's the kind of the idea behind knight h5, which which I guess is a little bit more tactical than the last line because white is just trying to force the position. But another move, so we've covered knight e4, rook d1, knight h5, but now this other move, knight f5, seems to kind of um, kind of follow the same idea as knight h5, and we're not moving the knight to the edge of the board. Well, first of all, looking at the knight h5 move again, if black were to castle queenside over here, um, which that move is fine, but after knight e5 over here, um, d4 can be played, and it gets very complex. g6, knight f4, and white's knight is kind of protecting, is kind of attacking some key squares, but here after g5, um, and yeah, it seems like castling over here is fine as well. So I'm going to cover after knight f5, castling is the main move, but over here, um, engine wants g3, so very tactical position. Black takes, obviously white can take, and that's what's going to happen. Or actually, we probably don't want to open this position up, so we take over here. Now black goes back to g6. We play f5 to uh, keep bothering the knight and to gain space. Though it seems like we could play e3 as well. And even though we're down a piece, we just have more control, and we also now can potentially attack black's king, which castled queenside. And if we were to take over here on e5, this is actually this is a mistake for the same reason I covered earlier. Or is it? Yeah, white can still get their pieces out, but yeah, this gets very complicated. So white ignores that the rook is hanging and just wants to bring the queen into attack. So black has to play they have to play d5 over here, and now black can just take this bishop. So if white were to and if white were to save the rook, then I'm bishop c3 check here, and queen b1 is mate because the rook is pinned. So yeah, very quickly white can find themselves in trouble in this position, and so can black. This is extremely tactical. But yeah, I guess this is another way that can be played after knight h5. Um, Black can castle or play knight e5. And so now we're going to go back to this knight f5 move, which seems to have the same plans as knight h5, because the main move of after here was castling. But let's quickly look at knight e5 in this position. And yeah, knight e5 also works. G4 can be played. Rook c8, rook d1, and this looks similar to where the knight was on the e4 square, um, but now the knight is on the knight is on f5. So over here, black can play g6 as well as g5, and the knight goes to e3, which is fine because white is gonna play on these diagonals, so it's fine that it blocks the pawn. So if black were to also go g5 in this position, g5 is played, and I think we have a more standard type game. The knight gets pushed back to g3. So the knight had a little bit of a journey, but ended up going back to the square it started on. And yeah, lots of moves can be played after here. So that's another way to play this position. After knight f5, knight e5 is the way, but also castling, black can castle. And castling, after castling over here, um, many moves can be played. I'm not going to go over all of them because it would take quite long. But one move that could also work in the knight h5 line. Again, there's some overlap in these lines, but it's the engine is not noticing its strength right now. But it's this move b4. So after mm, black castles queenside, white can just go for b4, which aims to open up the aims to open up the king side right away. And if black were to take, which is not a good idea, first of all, taking like it spends one move, and that just opens up the position uh, more for white's pieces to come into the game. So we don't want to do that. It's just strategically not good. Knight e5, g4. See, after making a couple moves on the board, black the engine starts to see uh, just how strong his position is. Bishop takes c5 now, and knight can take on g4. You can win the rook, and then white can take on b6 as an example line. C takes b6. Knight goes to d4, and well, in this position, black is a little bit better, but white has more. Um, White has quite a big initiative against black's king, which can be very difficult to deal with. So after c takes b6, I'm just looking because the engine was saying that white was a little bit better after c takes b6. Oh wow, okay, c takes b6. So we're allowing to take the queen. B takes e7. Okay, yeah, the king cannot move. King d7. Rook b1. G takes f5. So black is up 10 points of material, but white goes to b8, and white is just gonna promote. Wow, okay. So live, we're coming up with some new theory. So then knight takes g4 might not be the best move. So I will promote this as a main line and say this is a little bit of an inaccuracy because I wonder about knight takes d3 check. That would also be a little bit of an inaccuracy. E takes, but because here white had to take back, but then there's still c takes, a takes b6, and b takes b6. So now h takes g4. We're actually going to remove that line because white has clearly a better move there. And so after bishop b takes c5, see the engine thinks knight takes g4 is good, but it's not. And the engine wants b takes, you can't always trust the engine, but after b takes c5, the game can continue with knight e3. White saves the knight and is just looking for the uh, light squares. But now, after knight e3, now black can take on g4. And now there's no c takes d there. But after h takes g4, bishop takes a1. White is still definitely in this game because when black castled queenside at the beginning of the game, they opened their king to potentially being vulnerable. So here, white played queen g2, looking to threaten checkmate. So after d5 was played, c takes d5. rook d6 blocks white from playing d6 and then bringing the queen in. Um, and we have a game from here. White can play like queen e4 and maybe queen a4 eventually, but looks like this move allows bishop c6, which would make the king. Um, so knight c4, yeah. Here black is a bit better. So instead of queen g2, now we could play maybe bishop h3, but that would run into g5 probably. Mm-hmm. So after, and this kind of when you're coming up with theory, then we look at different moves. Then sometimes the engine tells us different things. Um, so instead of taking, we could play d4 is a very surprising move, but let's. So we could play knight e3 and allow knight takes c4, I guess. Or we could play d4, which is an interesting move to say the least. So let's see what the engine says after d4. B takes c5. e4. And it's showing black is just better. Yeah, so maybe knight e3, because after this move, d4 is probably not good. Okay, and yeah, this position obviously very, very complicated. So again, knight f5, castle, castle, b4, but you can always just play g4 and go into more standard type lines. So that's knight f5. Now I will just quickly go over. So I will just quickly go over queenside castles as the first move, and this move I wouldn't recommend just because white isn't any safer after this move, and they just spent one move, which is why black is slightly better. So knight e5, um, for example, knight h5. Um, if black were to take, then we have g4 and attacking the rook. So rook d8, g4, e6, bishop e4, g6, d4 gets played, c takes d4, bishop takes d4, knight f6, takes e3. Um, and in a position like this, the reason why black is just slightly better is because black had one extra move to develop, and white's king is not any safer queenside castling. So now we go into the move 1 e3. So there are a couple more moves to go over. So we showed the move rook d1 and then white played e3, but this kind of is kind of the same way to just um, arrive at the same type of position. So we kind of already went over this with d4 queen c2, but there's also like lines like knight h5, bishop takes, g4, bishop g6, white takes on a1. So now white is up in exchange, but the exchange comes at the cost of black winning a pawn as well. And they're coming into the position, so now white is up an exchange but down one pawn, knight e2, and like a game could go on like this. this is an acceptable way to play just because white is a little bit less developed, black is just more developed, but they at the cost of 1 point of material. Knight could go to e4 as well, rook d8, g4, e6, d4, bishop g6, knight c3, knight d3 check, takes, bishop c6 check, king f7, h4. So that's like kind of like another way that that game could go. And white could also start the game with um, the last. Well, rook c1 is also a move to start the game, but that move is around even, and I won't go over that. b4, starting the game with b4 is just a little bit of a inaccuracy because if black is not castling queenside, it doesn't help that much, and it just spends one move. But the last viable move I'm going to go over in this video, it's already quite long, is 1d4. After d4, there are a couple of moves. So knight h4 is one of them, but I'm going to just move knight e5 as the main move. So after knight e5, you might just think, why can't white take? Well, if white were to take on e5, this is inaccurate because black is looking to gain tempo here, and they're threatening a fork. So white moves the rook out of the way, and then g5 comes. So black wants to take this pawn, and then they want to go to c3 and checkmate white. So after knight f3, black brings the second bishop in, knight e4 is played, and the queen takes e4, which allows white to gain a move back because now the queen and the rook are both attacked, and also the queen cannot go to c3. So, but if white were to not move that knight, for example, they played e3 after bishop takes e5, bishop e2, for example, then black could just take on a2. But also we have the same issue that I just showed earlier in the video where white can't really move this knight and the bishop is blocking white, the development white wants to have. So that's why in general taking there is not good. So after knight e5, e3 is the main move, queen c2, knight e4, takes with check, king d2, queen goes to b7. Now white takes, rook goes to d8, e6. So white doesn't want black to take back and open up that file. So e6, bishop takes e6, g4, which attacks the queen. And this is kind of like an even position. So that's with playing knight e4. But white doesn't have to give up that pawn for activity because, not that pawn, that knight for activity. They can play rook d1, after g6, bishop e2, bishop f g7, and now they can't take on e5 because of the same idea. So again, the engine's saying knight e4, just give up that piece. But after knight f3, for example, after knight f3, black can just take on a2. And you'll note here that black never gave up that knight because white never took it. So black is just going to win the pawn, which is why the engine just wants knight e4. Wants knight e4. And if black were to just take on a2 like they did in the other line, then black is winning the pawn, but and this position is very tactical. Now white can take the knight, This is why this is bad, because now this move is different because white has already played g4 and moved the knight, so now white doesn't. Now white can take the piece, which is why after knight e4 black would take, and then oh wait, black cannot take over here. So the other position black could, but here they cannot. Knight e4. Let's just see what the engine wants black to play. Okay, just take, take, knight c6. Now white plays g4 and protects the knight. Rook c8. Oh wow, knight f3. The engine wants to allow black to take this and then go to g5. Queen c2. Bishop takes c6 check. Rook takes c6. Yeah, this position is suddenly called swimming in tactics for a reason. Queen g2. e5. C takes d5. H takes g5. D takes c6. And so black doesn't save this rook. Or I guess they could with rook f6. And then we go d6. So now the queen can get into the position. After queen c3 check. Rook d2. Queen c1 check. Rook d1, so they're going to have a repetition in this line. Or king f1, then rook takes f2 check. Queen takes f2, h takes g5. And black is up 3 points of material here. Bishop e5 check. So yeah, things get quite complicated in this custom position. But that's kind of all I wanted to cover for today. Took a little bit longer because some lines, as you go through them again, you realize there's just more and more theory. But we saw in this position, activity is super important. Blocking the opponent's development is important. There's a lot of tactics with the rooks on a1 and a8. The central control is a theme. Attacking the queenside, castling. It's quite a varied custom position with plenty of possibilities. So yeah, that's just wanted to go over the main ideas of this position, and we'll be uploading some theory on other positions as well. But hope that was an interesting video, and hope it showed some great possibilities that you can have with custom chess positions.